All right, a viewer asked about my tipping standards while playing poker. So let's do that. 4 streets, there's pre-flop, the hand can end pre-flop, the hand can end on the flop, it can end on the turn, it can end on the river. I have very, very rarely in my life tipped a hand that ended pre-flop. I think it happened 3 times ever. Once was in Council Bluffs. There was a ton of betting, and I took it down pre-flop, but I added like well over $150 to my stack. And there's no rake pre-flop. So, I mean, I added a ton of money to my stack, and nothing was taken out rake-wise or promo-wise, so I tipped $1 for that. Also, there were 2 times in my life where we got short-handed, and the dealer was very good, and because a lot of hands short-handed, like end pre-flop, the hand is going faster than the shuffle machine, so the dealer wasn't just sitting there staring at the shuffle machine, which they do sometimes. A couple of times the dealers were very quick hand shuffling, getting us out hands, even though we were short-handed, and I happened to win like, 3 or 4 in a row while this dealer's constantly hand shuffling, even though most of them are ending pre-flop, because like that's what happens when you're like 3-4 handed, raise and folds. That happens a lot of the time. Even though I wasn't winning a ton of money, the dealer was putting in a great effort, so I tipped a couple times on some really tiny pots just because of the circumstances. So that's really pre-flop. If there's just like the blinds out there and I raise to 15 and everyone folds, I've never tipped in my life in that scenario. Hands that end on the flop. For a long time, I did not tip hands that ended on the flop. For me, for like all of 2015 and 16 in Vegas, probably all of 2015, like a chunk of 2016, there had to be a called bet on the flop in order for me to tip. If there was a raise pre, whatever the action pre-flop was, okay, get to the flop. If I bet and everyone folded, I wasn't tipping. Like the pot wasn't big enough for me to tip. And I don't know, that might seem a little stricter than some people. There were a lot of dealers I was friendly with. No one seemed to have a problem with it. At least to my face, no one had a problem with it. But that's what I was doing. Also, someone that I knew who played for a living said the same thing. Said he doesn't even think about it until there's a called bet on the flop and the hand goes beyond that. He was in a lot of the same rooms I was. He was in a long-term relationship with someone who worked in a poker room. He was in poker rooms I wasn't in. I saw him be friendly with a lot of employees. No one seemed to have a problem with him, and it was like the same rules I had. So even though it might have been uncommon, don't think it was like insane. We weren't being rude to the dealers, but we were playing for a living, and on smaller pots, we weren't tipping. After that, yeah, if there's a bet called on the flop, then the hand has to get to at least the turn. After that, standard is 1. If the dealer does something extraordinary, I tip more. Sometimes there was a dealer I can think of in Windstar. He wouldn't just like deal the cards and sit there. Like, that's the worst thing you could do. Beyond that, you could deal the flop out and like point to the first player to act and say your action, get the action going so we don't waste time. He went even beyond that. Instead of saying like your action or it's your turn or it's on you, he would say something like, let's get this party started. So I felt like a lot of the times he said that, he was actually inducing action, which might not be like great by the rules, but it was great for us as players. I swear there was a time, there was this guy who was like 75, I swear he was about to check. And when the dealer said, let's get this party started, the guy bet out 45. So that was awesome. That guy got extra tips because he was building pots. And sometimes if just the dealer, there's something like tricky. There's an all-in, there's a side pot. The dealer does it right, says like, let me see these hands in the side pot. The side pot hands need to show first, then the main pot hands show last. Just keep it clean so there's no confusion, so there's no like misdeal, so there's no people acting or folding out a turn. If the dealer does something difficult very well, very smoothly, extra $1. And then I guess the last category is all-ins. All-ins really depend on the size of the all-in, I guess. If someone has like $100 to start the hand and you get all in and win, it's not like a massive amount. Usually for like keeping the stacks up, if it's possible, if the guy bet like $25 at a time, his stacks aren't up anymore. But if like the all-in was like $125, sometimes the dealers just push it over. I don't know why. If the dealer keeps it up, it's not a big deal to me. I mean, I could stack chips, but just that the dealer was like thinking of like trying to keep the game moving a little faster. For other people, it's important. Some people, their hands don't work well. It's difficult for them to stack a ton of chips. So if it's just habit for the dealer to keep the stacks up as they move an all-in bet across the table, that's good. That usually gets an extra $1. And just giant all-ins get more tips. There's the thinking out there that, like, you know, tip the same amount per hand. Who cares how much is in the pot? The reason I tip more for bigger pots is because mistakes are more severe in bigger pots. A long time ago at MGM, this was like 2016, I think, like February 2016, I think it was, a dealer made an awful mistake. The pot was only $7. So, like, the game wasn't destroyed, and, like, even though it was my money that the dealer gave to someone else, it wasn't a huge amount. And because the pot was small, the mistake wasn't severe. If there's like an $800 pot and the dealer makes a mistake, that's bad. I've seen like the game totally freeze, everything stops. Sometimes the floor has to go to surveillance. Sometimes it's up to me to like redo the action in the entire hand, to like undo every bet and figure out what went wrong. Mistakes are much worse in larger pots. So if there is a huge pot, if I win a large all-in, me and another guy start with 500, I win that all-in, that gets more of a tip because it was more valuable for the dealer to be mistake-free in that hand. So I think the biggest tip, if you're wondering, that I've ever given in the biggest hand I ever played in Council Bluffs, it was a 4-way all-in pre-flop. We all had a pair. I had the biggest. No one improved. I held. It was about a $2,200 pot. I think I tipped $11 that hand. A handful of other hands that were, you know, between like 1,000 and 2,000, I've probably tipped, you know, 8, 9, or 10. And, you know, a lot of hands like 4 or 5 that are all ins. I guess another category I didn't think of was promos. I've said this before, but I'll say it in this video. Promos, I usually tip 10% for one reason. I know it's not free money. I know we're paying into the promo fund, but to me, a lot of the promos really are free. Like, I don't expect the money to ever come back. Like, promo money was taken out of the pots in Wisconsin. I never in my life won a promo in Wisconsin. For a very small time, there was splash pots, and there was always the bad beat. I didn't win either of those. So to me, even though it was like 6 + 1, to me it was just a rake of 7. That promo money never ever came back to me, and I started like my poker life not even knowing what the promos were some of the time, or not even caring. I knew the total amount being taken out of the pot, and I'm like, that's all rake to me. It's never coming back to me. So for one, when promos do come back to me, you know, you hit like, I don't know, jacks full of 7s, and for some reason that gets you a bonus. Sometimes you're not even aware of it until you show down and the dealer or another player says something. It's kind of like free money to me, so I tip normally 10%. I know some people tip way less. A lot of people don't tip at all. If it's a really small amount, I tip a little bigger. I think like the smallest promo I won recently was a high hand in Bally's in 2021. It was a $75 high hand, and me and another guy had the same hand, so we split it. So I got like $37. So I tipped like 5 or 6, slightly more than 10%. On really big ones, $5.99s, I dial it back a little. I tip $50 if I win a $599 promo. That's a little less than 10%, but you know, for every amount between 100 and 500, I tip 10%. And a little more if the dealer did something great. I remember a guy in Maryland Live in autumn 2020, the worst player by far at the table, ran out of money. Well, you know, he lost it all in. We didn't know how much more cash he had on him. He lost it all in. And instead of saying, like, are you coming back, which a lot of dealers would say, the dealer said, how much more are you buying in for? Like, he didn't give the guy the chance to say no, and he was trying to keep the guy at the table for us. So I happened to win a high hand during that guy's down, and I think I tipped my 10%, like plus all the $1 and $2 chips I had in my stack, because that was good, that the guy was trying to keep the worst player at the table for us. So there are my tipping rules. Someone asked, I told you, and I'm gonna go into the supermarket and buy some shrimp. And remember, rice is a spoon food.